Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 20th and tonight's movie is Spree. This is a movie that I have been aware of for a few years. It was probably on the short list for at least one Horror Nights, but it never made the cut. This year I decided to pull the trigger and actually give it a watch. Spree is a sort of not found footage. It's more like a social media type of movie, like screen recordings, uploads, TikToks, things like that. And it's about an aspiring influencer who is like, I'm sure they're going to make up some name. It's like an Uber driver. He's a boober driver and he wants to be an influencer on TikTok and MeTube. And apparently, his idea for how to get to the top is, at the very least, kidnapping, and more likely, kidnapping and then murdering people. I'm pretty sure that drugging passengers with bottled water is part of the scheme. I don't really know what the plan here is because you are committing crimes, felonies, and then uploading you doing that to the internet. Like, what is the end goal here? Like, how long can I do this without getting caught? How long until people put together that this is actually real and people are really dying? This is not the first movie I've watched for Horror Nights that is about social media and influencers and how far people are willing to push the envelope for the sake of content. Even if they're not the best, they're usually very interesting social commentary. However, never a good sign. When I Googled this movie, one of the first results that came up was a YouTube video that I think was, "This is the worst movie I've ever seen," which I don't know how much they're exaggerating. I don't know how many movies they've seen, but that's never a good thing to hear. So far, the worst movie I've ever watched for Horror Nights is The Mist. I hated all of it. I can't imagine Spree being quite that bad, but stranger things have happened. I'm gonna go give it a watch. I am surprised, actually. I was not expecting to like Spree as much as I do. I think I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I would recommend it. I've already mentioned how there have been plenty of social media centric horror movies I've watched for Horror Nights in the past. And again, they have varying degrees of success. There are movies like Followed or Deadstream that will simply present these stereotypes and archetypes as something to satirize and make fun of. But this movie goes more in the direction of Death of a Vlogger, where it presents these archetypes, but also really tries to dive into why people do this and how they become this way. I may have said this in the past, but the fact that I can't really remember when I would have said it means that this is a much better qualification. This movie, Spree, is the most Zoomer movie I have ever seen. The way that this movie was edited was a lot, like purposely a lot. There's like seven different camera angles in the main character Kurt's car, and it switches camera angles a lot. A lot of times there will be multiple different camera feeds going on at once. There will be two or three on screen, as well as like a live chat. It is so much so fast, and it really does remind me of that sort of like attention overload type of editing that's used for content made for kids. Like I was half expecting to see like Kinetic Sand or Subway Surfers appear in the corner. And it doesn't just stop there. The story and the characters are all these exaggerated caricatures of like people that we know of on social media. And it really felt like if someone like David Dobrik or Brent Rivera or Mr. Beast like wrote the script, it's like this is like a really fun, realistic movie. And I do understand that sounds like a condemnation of this movie, but it wasn't for no purpose. This movie sort of shows how when we're hit with so much so fast all the time, we get desensitized to it. And when everything is so fake all the time, we have harder times really distinguishing what we should be caring about at all. Once things get violent, the people in the live chat, half of them don't think it's real because the people making these videos and live streams, they fake stuff all the time. I mean, if someone like Brent Rivera or Jay Station uploaded a live stream about being chased by a serial killer, would people believe that? I kind of doubt it. The Zoomer vibes of this movie were done expertly. But I think overall, this movie is really carried by its two main characters, both the way that they were written and the way that they were performed. First is Kurt, played by Joe Keery. He is the live streamer who's on this spree. And the reason why it's called Spree is because the fake rideshare app that he works on is called Spree. I assumed that they called it that because it was a killing spree. I assume that's also part of it, though. And the other lead is Jessie, played by Sashir Zamata. She is a comedian who has a very strong social media presence. Starting out with Kurt. It's very interesting listening to him talk because he's like if you ask ChatGPT to tell you what an influencer acts like after showing it like 1,000 hours of the most bottom of the barrel brain rot influencer slop. It was very rare in this movie where I felt like he wasn't putting up a front or being fake when he spoke. And I mentioned Amy Dunn, a similar thing with her, but with her, it's because she is a cold blooded psychopath. With him, though, considering how young he is, he's 23, and the fact that he had been trying to make it big for 10 years, I almost kind of feel like he never really had the opportunity to figure out who he was because he was always on. He was always on camera. He was always trying to make it big. And I think he just put together bits and pieces from other influencers he saw, and there's not really a person there. It's like an AI generated image. It was so bizarre because I saw an entire movie with him, and I don't think I can tell you thing one about him as a person. I can't tell you his personality. I can't tell you what he likes or dislikes, or any of his beliefs at all. And a lot of times, when a person is that inauthentic, they also have a sort of charm that makes it not as noticeable, but he doesn't have it. He's not good at being an influencer. They established that multiple times. This character is scary, but in like a very mundane, boring kind of way. That is a sharp contrast to almost all the other characters in this movie, which are larger than life caricatures. The one major exception to that being Jessie. I call her one of the leads. It's more accurate to say that she plays the most prominent supporting role. She is the everyman of this movie, which usually is the main character. She couldn't possibly have less interest in putting up with other people's nonsense, so she can be a bit short with people at times, but she does seem normal. And she actually does have a decent amount of self awareness, which is a very rare thing in this movie. Then you got a bunch of other wacky characters. One of them is another influencer, and I recognize the actor as the brilliant mind behind Jared, 19, who never learned how to read. This movie is a satire of social media culture, but it's really not even that exaggerated. The thing about Jack Doherty crashing a car and the way he acted after that, he's like 95% of the way there already. The movie was pretty good for most of it, but there's a scene at the beginning of the third act that really bumped up the quality and made the whole movie feel more meaningful. It's not just making fun of people, it's trying to examine the inner workings of how these things happen. I would recommend it, and to go into more detail about why, I want to talk about spoilers now. As I've said, this movie has a lot of played up, exaggerated stereotypes. The people that Kurt kills in his car are the first one is like a parody of a man on the alt right. Then there's like a Karen, and then we got like an F boy type of guy. And this was like a shared ride, and he picked up Jessie. And of course, he starts harassing her immediately. It got to the point where she pulled out her phone and started live streaming it to her large audience, which I don't personally think is ethical, but he dies like one scene later, so he's not complaining. Anyway, Kurt knows how famous she is, and then he sort of tries to do the hey, hey, follow for follow, hey, tag me. And she doesn't really want to put up with that either, but she's more focused on the man right next to her. Eventually, she loses her temper and storms off. She tells off the man who harassed her, and she says to Kurt, tone it down, you're laying on a little bit thick. And then the movie continues a while with some downright zany hijinks. And then it goes back to the show that she was performing that night. And one of her things was like, all eyes on me. She was like a strong social media presence as well as a comedian. And Kurt goes to that show after a bunch of silly situations, and she starts talking about the spree ride that she had earlier, and she like tears into the man who harassed her. And then I expected her to do something very similar to Kurt, just like make fun of him. And I thought he was going to freak out and like shoot up the place or something. He has a gun. And it did start out like that. And then, like, she was saying, like, he was so desperate. It was like, hey, follow for follow. Please notice me, Lord. And I was expecting her to continue. And then she said, and it made me so sad because that was me at one point. She goes on to say that it's strange that we all want this attention so much, and we don't seem to care at all about the fact that constantly being watched also means you're constantly being judged. She says that people are just always putting on a show on social media. And if you devote so much of your life to that, just trying to be what you want other people to see you as, there's not a lot of room for who you are. And I've said similar things about Kurt, and I think that that's really struck a chord with Kurt. After the show, Kurt takes another ride sharing app because at that point word had gotten out that a spree driver had killed multiple people, so they shut down that in order to investigate. So he went to another ride sharing app called GoGo, and he killed that driver and stole that car and pretended to be a GoGo driver and then picked Jesse up after the show. The climax of the movie is the two of them fighting with each other, and there are also some very shocking moments, one very shocking reveal, and it ends with Jesse winning. And I did not put this together while I was watching the movie. I heard this from Amanda the Jedi's video about this film. She, I think, kills him with his own phone, which is some very dramatic symbolism for what his life had become. In the epilogue of this movie, we see Jessie use the fame and attention that this ordeal brought her to further her own career and try to improve the industry. And Kurt did eventually get the fame that he wanted, but it wasn't really any sort of admiration. It was more like the reason why people know a lot about the personal lives of the Columbine killers. It's kind of just like a morbid fascination. And the last part of the movie is someone on 4chan saying that they took all the publicly available footage of that killing spree and edited it together into a movie. And then the movie ends. I thought that Spree was a very interesting movie. It was not what I was expecting. I was expecting it to be a very annoying movie with a bunch of ridiculous characters. And it definitely can be that sometimes, but it's all for a purpose. It does come together. I enjoyed it. Unexpectedly, it's been one of the more enjoyable movies of this month. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.